Welcome everyone to the webinar. For those of you just signing on, we'll get started in a few minutes as we wait for more attendees to arrive. So sit tight and we'll start soon. Thanks. Well, I think we can get started now. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and welcome to the 2021-2022 Better Buildings webinar series, dedicated to bringing you the latest actionable insights from leading industry experts. This annual series is a chance to explore the topics, technologies, and trends that affect your organization, as well as efforts to accelerate energy efficiency adoption. Thank you for being here. Today's webinar, Put Your Money on It, Investing in Energy Efficiency, represents a milestone in energy efficiency financing. The webinar will preview a first of its kind study showing that financial institutions can lend money to customers across a broad range of income levels for energy efficiency improvements at low risk in support of creating a more efficient building stock in our country. While performance of energy efficiency lending has generally been understood to be strong, the data made available in this study significantly expands the volume and sophistication of the public evidence. Before we dive in, there are a few housekeeping points I would like to cover. First, please note today's webinar will be recorded and archived on the Better Building Solution Center. We will follow up when today's recording and slides are made available. Next, attendees are in listen-only mode, meaning your microphones are muted. If you experience any audio or visual issues throughout the webinar, please send a message in the chat located on the bottom of your Zoom panel. Next slide, please. My name is Sean Williamson, and I'm your moderator today. I'm an Energy Technology Program Specialist in DOE's Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. In partnership with the State and Local Energy Efficiency Action Network, or C-Action, and the lead authors at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, I've had the great honor of coordinating the work you will be hearing about today. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will include 4 sections and 4 speakers. First, the lead authors of the forthcoming study, Long-Term Performance of Energy Efficiency Loan Programs, will preview the study, including the data sources, methods, results, and implications. I'll introduce Greg Leventis and Jeff Deason in a moment. Next, we'll turn to reaction and insights from the efficiency financing community. We'll hear from Mary Templeton from Michigan Saves, who will provide the perspective of an efficiency financing program. Then, Neda Arabshahi from Inclusiv will share the perspective of a financial institution. Finally, we'll save about 10 minutes for questions and discussion at the end. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is a big deal because it introduces a barrier-breaking study that invites the investment community to see energy efficiency loans as secure, strong-performing assets for the first time. There's so much untapped potential for investment in efficiency retrofits in our country's building stock. According to the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, the energy efficiency financing market in the US totaled $7 billion in 2019, which is roughly a 40% increase since 2014. However, given the $500 billion in remaining cost-effective retrofit potential in the US, not to mention the need for rapid decarbonization of our building stock and opportunities for job creation, $7 billion per year is not nearly enough. We need to scale up our investment rate quickly, and we need to do it with the help of the entire investment community, including large banks, pension funds, credit unions, and other financial institutions. Since specialized energy efficiency lending emerged over the past decade or so, we've heard from many financial institutions that they're interested in lending more within the efficiency space, but they're not quite ready. They need more evidence that energy efficiency loans perform and compete with other available investment opportunities. The forthcoming C-Action study, Long-Term Performance of Energy Efficiency Loan Programs, provides the evidence financial institutions have been asking for. The findings from this study, which looked at over 50,000 loans, significantly expands the volume and sophistication of the public evidence base through loan level analysis of 4 large programs, 3 with track records of more than a decade, and 1 that spans an economic cycle. I'm so excited, I could keep going, but we'll stop now and reserve that right for our speakers and subject matter experts to share the important findings from this study. Next slide, please. Let's pivot to audience interaction for today's webinar and launch a quick poll to better understand you all, our audience. So today we will be using an interactive platform for questions and answers, polling, and feedback. Please go to www.slido.com on your mobile device or by opening a new window in your internet browser. Today's event code is #DOE. If you would like to ask our panelists questions, please submit them anytime throughout the presentation. We will be answering your questions near the end of the session. You can select the thumbs up icon for questions that you like, which will result in the most popular questions moving to the top of the queue. All right, so let's dig into our poll here, which hopefully folks have now found on Slido and are beginning to answer. Please join us over at Slido if you've not made your way there already. I see that we are sharing the results live on our Zoom. And just for those of you who maybe don't see the question or don't have all the options, the question is, select the type of professional organization you're representing today. The options include lender, capital provider, financial advisory, private consultant or contractor, nonprofit organization, state or local government, federal government, and other. Give folks about 10 to 15 seconds to answer the poll. And I think I'm reading this correctly, that the nonprofit organization is the majority of attendees right now, in terms of the organization being represented at about 1/4 of attendees. This is followed by private consultants or contractors and state or local governments at about 20% each. Excellent. With that, I'd like to move on to our next slide and introduce today's presenters. So we have a great lineup for today. Our first speaker is Greg Leventis. He's a program manager in the Electricity Markets and Policy Department at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. He conducts research and analysis of demand-side efficiency and coordinates technical assistance for the National Community Solar Partnership. His research focuses on efficiency and solar finance, cost of saving energy, and incentive program design and analysis. Our next speaker is Jeff Deason. He's a program manager and energy efficiency team leader in the Electricity Market and Policy Department at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. He conducts research on programs promoting energy efficiency and other demand-side energy resources with a focus on financing programs. Our next speaker is Mary Templeton, who serves as the president and CEO of Michigan Saves, the nation's first nonprofit green bank whose mission is to serve Michigan residents by stimulating and supporting investment in energy efficiency and renewable energy systems in homes and commercial buildings. Since Michigan Saves was formed in 2009, the organization has enabled more than $350 million in clean energy investments in the state of Michigan. Our last speaker is Neda Arabshahi. She's the director of the Inclusiv Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy. In this capacity, she's working to build a network of credit unions committed to designing and scaling solutions to climate change with the goal of promoting affordable and sustainable energy for all people. Thanks to all of our presenters for being with us today, and thank you to our audience for joining this very significant webinar. So excited to share this with everyone. With that, I'll hand it over to Greg and Jeff to kick us off.
Right. Thanks so much, Sean. I appreciate it. And thanks to Better Buildings for giving us this chance to talk about our work. Also, thanks to DOE's Office of Weatherization and Intergovernmental Programs and the Office of Strategic Analysis for funding this work and for some great guidance in developing it. Next slide, please. What Jeff and I are going to talk about today is, as Sean was mentioning, it's upcoming report on analysis that we conducted for the State and Local Energy Efficiency Action Network, or C-Action, of 4 energy efficiency financing programs. And we expect the report to be available in the first quarter of 2022. Now, as Sean also mentioned, anecdotally, the performance of energy efficiency lending is generally understood to be strong. And by 2019, 2020, several energy efficiency financing programs have been operating for 10 years, and that provides us a robust track record that we can analyze those claims with. So first, I'm going to give an overview of the project. Then I'm going to characterize the programs through some descriptive statistics. And then after that, Jeff is going to discuss the loan performance and how the performance compares to other loan products. Next slide, please. All right, so starting with the overview, as Sean mentioned, there's no comprehensive loan level analyses of the financial performance of efficiency loan program portfolios. Given the robust track record that is now available that I was mentioned, we believe this will be valuable information for capital market stakeholders who are generally unfamiliar with these portfolios. So our objective here is to, as it says, make available for the first time a comprehensive analysis of energy efficiency loan performance data from multiple state programs. And these are not just 4 programs, each of them serves 4 different states. So there's some variability in the geography there as well. And we hope that this will increase investor confidence in these efficiency loans and that it will increase the availability of capital at better terms for efficiency financing programs. Next slide, please. Now, the analysis covers 4 programs. First, Connecticut's Smarty Loan Program, which started in 2013 and is an unsecured off-bill loan. And by the way, an on-bill loan is one in which loan payments are made on the utility bill, whereas for off-bill loans, loan payments are made separately. Next is Pennsylvania's Keystone Help, which started in 2006. And we were able to get data for the program from 2006 through 2017. It's also an unsecured off-bill loan, and as Sean noted, that our data for this program includes loans that went through the Great Recession, so they weathered an economic cycle. Then there's Michigan Saves, which began in 2010, and it includes unsecured off-bill and some on-bill loans as well. And then New York's NYSERDA on-bill recovery loans and smart energy loans, which also started in 2010 and are unsecured on-bill and off-bill loans. Now, the analysis only includes loans in these portfolios that are energy efficiency only. And in total, we have over 52,000 energy efficiency only loans, although we don't necessarily have that data for every data point. So we may have fewer observations for certain analyses, like, for example, income. And then finally, before we go on, I wanted to note that we will also have a separate report that's coming out soon that is focused on the solar loans in the loans that contain solar in 3 of these portfolios. Keystone Help does not offer solar loans. So next slide, please. So now, so that you have a sense of what these portfolios look like, I'm now going to go over some of the descriptive statistics for the portfolios, starting with the loan characteristics. So next slide, please. This first one shows the loan volume for each program by year or vintage. And you can see here in the orange, Pennsylvania going through the economic cycle there. You also see that most of the activity occurs in the past 5 to 6 years. Like Sean noted, Connecticut's program has been around for around 7 years, but the others have been operating for 10 plus years with thousands of loans each year. So this is a robust track record that we have here. Next slide, please. This one looks at the principal amount, which is how much money the program participant borrows. On the left hand, we have the percentage of loans that falls into each of the principal amount bins, which you see along the bottom there. You see that most of these loans are for between $5,000 and $10,000, with the average across the programs around $9,000 and the median around $7,600. Next slide, please. Okay. Thanks. Now, the loan terms are dependent on program rules. You see these bins here. There's not really a lot of variability within the bins. So most of these loans are taken out for 10 years. Although, as you see, NYSERDA is an outlier here. It's got a lot of 15-year loans. Next slide. Then we have the interest rates. And these are also dependent on the program, and they don't necessarily stay static. They can change over time, and there are also special offers too. For example, a special 0% interest rate offer in Connecticut explains the low interest rates there. It was a promotional offer, and they made a lot of loans during that time period. But the rates range from 0 to almost 9%, with an average and median interest rate of 5%. Next slide, please. Now, the principal amount, loan term, and the interest rate that I've just talked about, they all add up to determine what the monthly payments will be. And the average payment is $93 a month. The median is $80 a month. So this gives you a sense of what the ongoing obligation looks like from the borrower's perspective. Next slide, please. So now we have the borrower characteristics, and these are important because they can more directly impact the performance of the loans. Next slide, please. So first, income. Now, not all of the programs had household income data, but we were able to use location information to make an apples-to-apples comparison for 3 of the programs. Keystone Help didn't have sufficient data to include that program in the income analysis. So the bins here on the bottom represent the average income in the census tract where the project is located compared to the area median income, the AMI. And this is not the income of the participant, but rather what we believe is a good proxy. And as you see, the average tract income is 91% of the AMI, and the average median, or rather the median tract census tract income is 88% of the area median income. And note that across these programs, the majority of the borrowers are from census tracts within median incomes, with median incomes that are less than the median income of their statistical area. Next slide, please. So last but not least is credit scores. And you'll note that they're on the higher end as compared to the incomes, which had a more normal curve, like a bell-shaped curve. These are skewed to the right. So these are reasonably high credit scores with both average and median credit scores well above 700. Next slide. So that hopefully gives you an idea of what these loan portfolios contain and what they look like. And now for how they perform and compare to other loan products, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jeff Deason. There.
Thank you, Greg. And good afternoon, everyone. And so Greg has just done a thorough job of describing the loans and the portfolios of loans that we studied. And I am now going to take you through an analysis of how these loans performed from a financial perspective. And we will generally consider 2 performance metrics, as Greg mentioned, both delinquency rates, which is the share of the outstanding loan principal from a portfolio or portfolios that is past due, as well as loss rates, which is the share of the original loan principal that has been charged off or declared as lost. And I will explain how we define each of those factors in a little more detail in the next coming slides. So next slide, please. We'll start here with delinquency rates. And so this figure shows the share of the active loan principal in each portfolio that we studied that was between 30 and 120 days delinquent as of the date of each program data set that we received. And to explain this 30 to 120 window, 30 days is a common marker of first delinquency in that a loan is at least a month overdue. And 30-day delinquency rates are quoted fairly widely in the literature. And as far as 120 days, we consider loans that are more than 120 days delinquent to be losses or charge-offs. And so we remove them from this delinquency rate computation. They're in a separate category. And using this 120 days delinquency as a marker of charge-off ensures a consistent definition across the portfolios. And it also generally comports with practices we see in other lending markets. And so to review the data up here at the top, about 17,000, we started with 52,000 loans, as Greg mentions. About 17,000 of those loans were paid off at the time we got the data, meaning that either they had come to full term or they had been paid early. About 2,000 of those 52,000 loans in our data were charged off as of the time we received the data, leaving about 33,000 active loans. And that's why we see a sample size of 33,239 here down at the bottom. So with all that out of the way, what we see here is that the delinquency rates do vary somewhat across programs, but they're all between about 0.5% and 2.5%. And when we pool the four portfolios, which we're going to do often in this analysis, the overall delinquency rate is 1.57%. And again, in general, we're focusing on these pooled rates because we're trying to characterize the performance of energy efficiency loans broadly across all of these portfolios. And later in the presentation, I'll put this delinquency rate in context by comparing it to the delinquency rates of other loan products measured at the same times. Next slide, please. And here we show the cumulative loss rates, again, for each portfolio, and then also aggregated across all portfolios. That's what the red line represents. And in general, the red lines and bars will represent the aggregate across all four portfolios in all of our figures. And to create this figure, we basically declare the calendar year in which a loan is made to be year 0, and then each subsequent year is year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And we assess the share of the initial loan principal that had been charged off on December 31st of the year in question to create this graphic. So for example, the year 0 delinquent loss rates here are the share of the loan principal, original loan principal that had been lost as of December 31st in the year that the loan was made. The year 1 loss rates are the share that had been lost as of December 31st in the following calendar year, and so on and so forth. And as we can see here, the loss rates are broadly similar across the portfolios, and the loss curves all display a similar shape. In particular, the curves are somewhat concave, meaning that loss rates are highest in the early years following loan issuance, and then they taper off in later years. And overall, just tracking the red curve here, the pooled portfolios lost 2.1% of their principal by year 2, 3.3% by year 4, 4.5% by year 6, and 5.1% by year 8. And again, we'll put this performance in context later in this webinar. But before we do that, I want to break down the performance of these loans by borrower characteristics. Next slide, please. So Greg gave us a sense of the credit scores of the participating borrowers. And this slide shows the delinquency rate across the pooled portfolios broken down by borrower credit score. And those credit score bins are ordered by lowest credit to highest, moving from left to right, with the overall delinquency rate, again in red. And again, that's the 1.57% we've seen previously. And as this figure shows, delinquency rates decline sharply as credit scores rise. And almost 6% of the outstanding balance is delinquent for borrowers with credit scores below 600, while only about 0.5% of the outstanding balance is delinquent for borrowers with credit scores above 780. And so as we can see, the relationship between credit score and delinquency is strong in these data. Next slide, please. This next slide shows the relationship between income and delinquency rates. And as Greg discussed, we have this income metric that is the ratio of the median income of the borrower's census tract to the area median income. It's not an actual household income value, though I'll come back to that later. Here we again see a relationship between income and delinquency. Houses from census tracts with higher incomes generally have lower delinquency rates. Again, the delinquency rates decline from left to right. However, this relationship is not as strong as the relationship between credit and delinquency. We can see here that borrowers from census tracts with median incomes of less than 60% of the area median, which is the leftmost bar, have a delinquency rate of 2.6%, while those from tracts with median incomes of more than 120%, which is the rightmost blue bar, have delinquency rates of 1.4%. So that discrepancy, the delinquency rate of the lowest income bin is less than twice that of the highest income bin. But in the previous slide on credit score, that there was about a factor of 12 separating the lowest bin, credit score bin, from the highest bin. So again, these results imply that the performance is far more sensitive to credit score than it is to income. Okay, the next two slides, next slide please, look at cumulative losses broken down by the same borrower factors. And so this slide shows cumulative loss rates by borrower credit score. And by matching the colors of the loss curves with the legend at the bottom of the chart, if you can do that in real time, we can see that the same pattern emerges. The lowest credit borrowers, who are represented by the yellow curve, have the highest loss rates at any given time, and the highest credit borrowers, who are represented by the green curve, have the lowest. And in these curves, we're only including loan vintages that total at least $10 million in initial principal amount due to sample size concerns where principal amounts are smaller than this. And that's the reason that we show fewer years of performance for the relatively low credit borrowers, because the sample size there is smaller. Nonetheless, for the data we feel comfortable with, we can immediately see that the relationship is clear and substantial. After 3 years, comparing the yellow curve to the green curve, the lowest credit band has lost almost 22% of the initial principal, while the highest credit band has lost only 0.4%. And in fact, by year 8, the highest credit band has only lost 1.3% of the loan principal. The next slide shows the same curves by income, using again the same income metric as before. Again, we see that the lowest income borrowers, represented by the yellow curve, have the highest loss rates, and the highest income borrowers, represented by the green curve, have the lowest loss rates. But again, the trend here is not quite as clear and stark as it is for credit. Looking at year 5, which is the last year we have data for both the lowest and highest income borrowers, we see that the lowest income band had lost 7% of total initial loan principal, while the highest income band had lost 2%. This is a clear difference, but again, it's not nearly as large in magnitude as the difference in losses between the highest credit and the lowest credit bands in the previous slide. So thus far, we've been breaking the data down by one factor at a time. And to further explore the data, we performed some regression analyses on our loan level data. That's summarized in the next slide. And this method allows us to study the relationship between loan performance outcomes and individual loan and borrower factors while holding all the other factors constant. And the slide indicates the factors in our regression model. They are the program making the loan, the seasoning of the loan, the time since loan origination, the interest rate of the loan principal amount, the borrower's credit score, and the AMI-based income metric we have used throughout. And the regression analysis essentially confirms the conclusions we've been drawing thus far. Credit score is a statistically significant predictor of both delinquencies and losses. The lower the credit score, the more likely loans are to be delinquent and more likely to be charged off. Income band is also associated with delinquency and loss rates, but not as strongly as credit score, and the differences are not always statistically significant. I'm not going to go through, in the interest of time, all of the rest of the numbers on this slide, but they do highlight the fact that essentially, as you cross the credit score band, the differences that this makes are larger than the differences as you cross the AMI bands. Okay, next slide, please. So in my remaining few minutes, I'm going to compare the financial performance we observe in our energy efficiency loan data with available data on other types of lending. And we're going to compare our loans with 2 loan products, auto loans and unsecured personal loans. And I want to be clear that these loans do differ in some important respects from the loans in our portfolios, apart from the fact that they're not loans for energy efficiency projects. Auto loans, importantly, are secured by the vehicle that they are loaned for, meaning that the borrower loses the vehicle if they do not repay the loan. And this, of course, is a powerful incentive for repayment that is not present for energy efficiency loans. If someone doesn't pay one of these loans, we don't go and rip the insulation back out of their walls, for example. Auto loans are also larger and have shorter payment terms than efficiency loans. Unsecured personal loans are not secured by collateral, like our loans, and they also have somewhat similar sizes, but they carry higher interest rates and shorter terms than the loans in our portfolios. So we're not pretending that these comparisons are perfectly apples to apples, but they do allow us to put the performance of our efficiency loans into context. The next slide compares the 30 to 120 day delinquency rates we observe in our efficiency loans with the delinquency rates from various auto and consumer loan indices that we were able to access. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to review all of these indices in detail. Our forthcoming report will do so. The key takeaway is that the delinquency rate for our efficiency loans, again, 1.57%, is lower than all the comparator loan indices. It's quite similar to, but slightly lower than, delinquency rates for both prime auto loans, which would be the third series from the left, or the second blue series from the left. And it's also comparable to, but slightly lower than, unsecured personal loans made by brick and mortar institutions, which would be represented by the second series from the left, as well as the fourth series from the left. The next slide shows cumulative loss comparisons between the efficiency loans and two comparator indices for which we were able to gather these data. Those are prime auto loans and personal loans to high credit customers made by online lenders, which are commonly known as fintech loans. And we'd like to acknowledge the cooperation of Kroll Bond Rating Agency for making the data available to enable this comparison. And one caveat here is that fintech loans in general, these online loans, do have higher loss rates than loans made by brick and mortar lenders like banks and credit unions. In general, the folks that issue the efficiency loans we study are brick and mortar institutions. And so that's an important caveat on the comparison. If we were comparing to brick and mortar lending, we would expect this gray line to probably be somewhat lower. Another caveat, however, that points in the other direction is that our energy efficiency loss rates are gross loss rates that do not include any revenues that were gained through collection activities after the loans were declared to be charged off. We simply didn't have access to those data. And all of the series that we're comparing to, both in this slide and the next slide, are net loss rates. Actually, can you go back to the previous slide for a moment? Thank you. And so our gross loss rates are essentially an overestimate of what the net loss rates in the efficiency loans would be after collections activities. And as this figure shows, the gross loss rates for the energy efficiency loans over time are much lower than the net loss rates from the fintech loans, and are similar to, though slightly higher than, the net loss rates for prime auto loans, which again are secured by the vehicles. And finally, our next slide compares what are known as annualized loss rates from various data sources to an estimated annualized loss rate from our loan programs. And annualization is a little bit of a tricky topic, and our method of annualization was highly approximate for our loans, which will be detailed in the forthcoming report. So this is a more approximate number than the previous slide, but it allows comparison to more external comparators because we were able to source annualized loss rates from a greater number of places, as shown here in this slide. And as with delinquency rates, we see here that the energy efficiency loans have similar but slightly lower delinquencies than both prime auto loans and non-credit consumer loans made by brick and mortar institutions. Those would be the second and third series here from the left. Okay, next slide, please. So our quick takeaways from this work: first, as Greg illustrated, energy efficiency borrowers are often, fairly high to high credit, and they are middle income. The average participant credit scores were 734. There were very few borrowers with very low credit scores. However, the average borrower is from a census tract with a median income just under the area median income. So that characterizes the population that's showing up for these loan products. We've shown that energy efficiency, delinquency, and loss rates are low. We've quoted these numbers several times. I won't repeat them here. And that credit scores and income both affect performance, but credit score far more so. And then when pooled across the four portfolios, energy efficiency loans do outperform their most logical comparators or perform quite similarly. They outperform creditworthy unsecured consumer loans in general, and their performance is very similar to prime auto loans, which again are secured by the vehicles. And finally, a few implications on the next slide. First, as Sean noted at the beginning, energy efficiency loans appear to represent an opportunity for capital providers and lenders to lend at low risk while in the process creating a more efficient building stock. Second, to the extent that the data here show stronger performance than might be expected, although to be clear, we don't have a clear reference point for expectations here. If that's the case, capital for energy efficiency lending may currently be overpriced. The third point is that high credit households in lower income areas can be expected to repay their loans at a strong rate. Again, credit appears to be a far bigger determinant of loan performance than income. And as such, energy efficiency lending can perhaps support policy goals related to equitable access to capital. I do want to make two comments on this point. First is that we did mention that we use this area-based income metric. For one program, we actually were able to access household level income. And in general, the results, the relationship between income and loan performance in that program was quite similar to the relationship between our location-based income metric and performance, which suggests that the use of the location-based metric is not obscuring a trend that would otherwise emerge. And the second point is that there are high credit households in lower income areas. We were able to study this in our data, and the correlation between income and credit, there is some correlation, but it is quite a bit weaker than might be expected. So there are many households in our data that are from lower income areas and have higher credit scores, and therefore would be expected to repay at a strong rate. And finally, we would suggest that the analysis of loan performance determinants, which we've given you a window into here, but we've got plenty more in our report, could be used to design credit enhancement mechanisms to encourage lending to households that are currently underserved by estimating the likely repayment for performance of different market segments that we may choose to access. And with that, I will, let's see, are we turning back over to Sean or are we going directly to Mary?
I'll just jump in, Jeff and Greg, to say thank you for succinctly collapsing 2 years worth of hard work into about 25 minutes. Very well done. I appreciate it. At this point, let's turn it over to Mary Templeton, who is going to provide reaction and insights from Michigan Saves, one of the portfolios reflected in the study. Take it away, Mary.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you to the DOE for funding this study and to Lawrence Berkeley National Labs for taking such care with the data and using such precision to evaluate the data. We really appreciate it. Sean started out the webinar today saying that this study is a big deal, and we could not agree more. As the nation's first nonprofit green bank, we get calls all the time as states or other jurisdictions stand up new green financing programs or even investigate whether that's a possibility for them. And we are so excited to have this study to point people to, and we believe that it'll be transformational in attracting private lenders to do more lending with more accessible loan products, which we did not have a study like this when we stood up Michigan Saves back in 2009. In fact, the term green banking didn't even exist. We didn't have data like this to review, and we had to basically create our program from nothing. We had $6 million from the Michigan Public Service Commission and a goal to address financing gaps in Michigan to accelerate investments in energy efficiency and clean energy projects. With somewhat limited funds and a goal to serve all of Michigan, we knew we had to leverage private lenders and the private market. We ended up doing a lot of stakeholder interviews, and lenders were instrumental, really, really important in those stakeholder interviews. And they stepped up from the start to help us create a program that met the unique needs of the energy market. With credit unions on the residential side and other financial institutions on the commercial side, we created a model that is simple. We use state dollars and some federal dollars to back private lenders in case of default, so that these lenders can offer better interest rates, longer terms for the loans, and more access. With this model, we've been able to support $350 million in investments in clean energy, energy efficiency, renewable energy. We've been able to leverage each dollar of public investment with $30 in private investment, because we can recycle that money as the loans are paid off. And we've only paid out 1.3% of the entire portfolio on defaults, which is a really incredibly low default rate. Next slide, please. So how does this credit enhancement work? We set up a loan loss reserve where we share the risk with the lenders. We do not pay 100% of every default. Instead, we set aside 5% of each lender's outstanding loan balance. Each month, we rebalance it. And so they have a max of 5% of the active outstanding loans that they can draw on if a default occurs. In the case of a default, a lender receives not the entire amount of the balance, but we've actually streamlined it. It's about 75% of the loan balance. And what this does is it really incentivizes those lenders to close more loans each month, because that continues to build up their loss reserve, so that if there are defaults, we can support them with this credit enhancement. They can claim a default after 90 days. And then they use their own collection mechanisms to try to get repayment or get the loan back in good status. And if they do, then that funding goes back into their loss reserve and it builds that loss reserve back up. When I talk about some of the benefits of yielding better rates and terms, let me give you an example. Our credit unions offer up to 15 years. Some of them are even extending beyond that to 20 or 25-year terms for solar projects. The interest rate is right around 4% fixed with no out-of-pocket expenses for the property owner. Amounts are up to $50,000, and even some of our lenders are starting to go beyond that into $60,000, $70,000, even $100,000. And all of our lenders offer loans to those with credit scores of 600 and above and debt to income ratios of 50% and below. We've worked really, really hard over the last 10, 11 years to expand our underwriting. We've worked really closely with the lenders, the credit unions, with the intent to serve more and more households that otherwise would not qualify for such low cost, long-term funding. Next slide, please. In fact, we're really, really proud of the fact that 56% of the residential loans that we have worked with our lenders to originate have been in low to moderate income households. Next slide. So some observations that we have about this study. First, why did we choose to participate in the study, share our anonymized data, review the reports, and working with this great team to answer any questions that we might have, that they might have. First of all, we love to learn from our industry peers. There are other programs that are represented on this in this study that have really good data. We like to compare our programs to that to see if there are things that we can do to refine our offering in our marketplace. And we think this is a really strong chance to use national data to support a case for the private market to continue to expand clean energy offerings. What did we learn? We understand that our defaults are low, but we wondered if that was represented all over the country. And we did learn that that was the case. We also like to look at defaults compared to credit scores and access to low to moderate income communities. And this study is fantastic proof that underwriting can be more expansive, especially in low to moderate income communities with good credit, without adding additional risk. Next slide, please. What are the implications? We're really excited about the possibility of continuing to expand underwriting without adding more risk. For those that have had challenges with credit scores due to maybe medical expenses, a loss of a spouse or a partner, or discriminatory issues like redlining that prevented people of color from building credit, owning homes, and building generational wealth, we think that these studies can be useful with lenders to prove that energy loans are good loans and can be offered to those with credit challenges and to those with limited income. When you think about expanding the terms and making the interest rates affordable, the concept of using energy savings to pay for the loan payment becomes a reality. Eventually, we would like to see the private lenders take this into consideration when underwriting the loans. We think this is a really unique factor that energy loans provide, which is not apparent in some of the comparators that were used in this study. We also think that this report gives us opportunities to rethink the way that we structure the loan loss reserve. For example, with evidence like what's shown in this report, would the private market have the confidence to make energy loans available for longer terms, better rates, and for more individuals, perhaps without the loan loss reserve? And can we use public funding in other ways to advance the market? We can then insert that pressure on things that really do need additional loan loss reserve support or credit enhancements. For example, we might be able to use the loan loss reserve to mitigate the risk of making loans to those with lower credit scores, while our lenders offer loans for credit scores as low as 600. What if we expanded beyond that? And what if we allowed energy savings to be included in the debt to income calculation? We'd love to begin to build a case for reducing interest rates, extending terms, and allowing more to be financed, perhaps with the support of a loan loss reserve in a previously inaccessible market. Also, we have the benefit of the loan loss reserve, but not all states have that. We've had the benefit of working with lenders that have been willing to expand their offering. Not everyone has had that experience. In order to address the climate changes and the climate challenges in front of us, we need to scale across the country, and we need to scale up fast. We think that this study proves that these loans consistently perform and should be the proof that the private lenders need to reimagine rates, terms, and access for these high-performing loans. Next slide, please. Many thanks to the DOE and Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. We believe that this report can really be transformational to accelerating investments in clean energy.
All right, thank you, Mary, for sharing your time with us today, as well as the wonderful data from Michigan Saves. What an exemplary program. Very happy to have you on with us today. All right, Neda, please take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Sean. Just to echo Mary's sentiments, we at Inclusiv are also very excited about this study. We think it's going to be completely transformational. If you could go to the next slide, please. So Inclusiv is a national network of community development credit unions. Our mission is to help low and moderate income people and communities achieve financial independence through credit unions. We are also a certified CDFI and have been working towards financial inclusion since 1974. If you could go to the next slide, please. We have a network of 420 community development credit unions, and 25% of the credit unions across the country that are currently offering green loans, energy efficiency and solar loans are Inclusiv members. I should also note that in our membership, 75% are low-income designated credit unions, 58% are community development financial institutions, CDFIs, 29% are minority depository institutions. So our network is really working to serve those members of our country that are historically excluded from the financial system. Next slide, please. And so as part of this work, we realized that credit unions were really well positioned to get involved in the green lending space. And so we launched our Center for Resiliency and Clean Energy. We are training community-based lenders, credit unions, loan funds, and community banks to offer accessible and affordable financing for clean energy and energy efficiency projects, particularly financing that serves the LMI and BIPOC communities. So we launched the nation's first solar finance training program for community-based lenders in partnership with the University of New Hampshire. And we've also been doing a lot of research into the role that community-based lenders play in green lending. And if you could go to the next slide, please. One thing that is really significant, just to put this in the national context, LMI and BIPOC communities already have a higher energy burden. So the energy burden for low-income households is 3 times higher than for non-low-income households. Black households spend 43% more of their income on energy costs than white households, and Hispanic households spend 20% more, and Native American households spend 45% more. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And I'm sure many have heard about President Biden's Justice 40 initiative, which is to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities. So these are the folks who have the higher energy burden. They're often first and most significantly impacted by climate change, and there is now a national commitment to address that. If you could go to the next slide, please. And as I mentioned, Inclusiv members, but credit unions in general, are already serving these Justice 40 communities. The members across the country in credit unions often are those that lack access to clean energy. As I mentioned, they have a disproportionately high energy burden, but credit unions are also really comfortable and well positioned with underwriting loans to those populations. And they have a very significant impact on the national economy. There are over 5,000 credit unions. They have combined assets of over $1.7 trillion. They serve 113 million members across the country. And they're starting to build a track record in green lending and energy efficiency, electric and hybrid vehicle, and solar lending. There are 292 credit unions that offer or are developing green loans, and 61% of those credit unions offering green loans are either community development financial institutions, low-income designated, or minority depositories. And to date, we have some limited data on their green lending, and they've completed over 1.3 billion in green loans over the past few years. Next slide, please. So actually, I'll just focus on the bottom half of this slide. There are some credit unions that have gotten involved early in green lending and built significant track record or made very significant commitments to this space. One is Clean Energy Federal Credit Union. They're a low-income designated credit union, and they exist just to offer clean energy loans and to make it easier for everyone to afford clean energy. So they've originated over 4,700 clean energy loans just in their first 3 years of operating. So that's just one example. Lots of different credit unions have been getting involved in this space. Next slide, please. So we've seen, I'll just skip to the important points here. The 292 credit unions that offer or are developing green loans have combined assets of over $283 billion. They're serving 17.3 million members. And as I said, 61% are targeting LMI and BIPOC communities. So these are lenders that have commitment to financing green projects. They have a commitment to serving those that have been historically excluded from our financial system and from the clean energy movement. And we at Inclusiv are providing training so that they're able to get their green loan programs off the ground. So there are many that are already working in this space, but there are many more that have not entered this space yet. We've been training lending professionals. We trained 76 financial institutions in solar lending, and we are expanding into energy efficiency lending as well. And bringing it back to how this research will impact this community, this network of lenders. Every single person who's taken our solar lending training program has said, how do these loan portfolios perform? This is the kind of data that they need in order to convince their management, their board of directors, and their regulators to approve adding and ramping up energy efficiency and solar loans. It will also help them to determine the appropriate rates and terms and loan amounts and which credit scores and income levels to support. And in particular, I think Mary mentioned this as well, it will help them to figure out what types of supportive programs like credit enhancement are needed so that energy efficiency loans can actually be accessible to those who might not have access through typical underwriting processes. So we see this study as something that our network has been waiting for, and they've told us over and over again will help them to finance more energy efficiency loans for more LMI and BIPOC members of their communities. Next slide, please. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me and I'll pass it back over to Sean. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Neda. If I could invite our speakers to go on camera now for our Q&A and invite our attendees to go to Slido if they've not already been there, www.slido.com, enter the code #DOE, and you can ask a question or upvote the questions we already see listed on Slido. And I'll start with directing a couple of questions towards Greg and Jeff. Some more characteristic questions about the loans. And I suspect Mary and Neda may have some thoughts on this as well. But what are we seeing in terms of the percentage of loans that are going towards single family residential versus multifamily or commercial? Likewise, do we have any insights or knowledge on the types of measures being financed with these loans? We have a question here about building envelope improvements, for example. Likewise, electric heat pumps, high efficiency gas equipment, or renewable energy retrofits. I know it's a lot there, but I'm trying to condense a lot of questions into one.
I mean, I can speak to some of that. This is exclusively single family residential loans, and we did not do analysis on end use types that were included in the projects. So we unfortunately don't have the analysis for that part. I don't know if you have more to add, Jeff, or if there are questions in there that I'm forgetting.
No, and perhaps Mary can speak to this for one program, but I mean, we don't. Yes, we did not focus on end use, measure data for this analysis. We would expect that these loans basically comprise a combination of, HVAC type improvements and building envelope types of improvements with other, assorted things mixed in. That's what we generally see in programs of this type. And to be clear, we, as Greg mentioned, we removed any loans that had solar PV as part of the loan and analyzed those separately, which will be part of a separate product.
Yeah, I would just confirm from the Michigan Saves point of view that most of them are HVAC improvements, building envelope, including like insulation and air sealing, There are other types of improvements in there, but most of them are related to building envelope and HVAC improvements. There was a question about heat pumps. Heat pumps, we have not seen a huge implementation of heat pumps in Michigan yet. However, we are seeing more and more evidence of that these days.
All right. And one more question that I think we've probably got time for here, with regards to any subsequent studies in the works that maybe look at loan performance of commercial buildings, look at performance of PACE loans, I saw that, as well as if there's any consideration of energy burden, and measuring the correlation between that and performance of these loans. Greg and Jeff, maybe you can speak to things in the works or potential studies that we might be able to do with more data in the future.
So a couple things. First, let's just be clear that none of these loan programs don't offer PACE assessments. So there were no PACE assessments in the study that we did here. We do have a variety of work on both residential and commercial PACE that we have done. None of it is directly assessing the same type of financial performance of PACE assessments that we study here. To the commercial question, we don't, Greg and I don't have any, research in the works on that at the moment. There's always the possibility of future. We do have colleagues at the lab, in particular, Paul Matthew, who has done a lot of work on commercial mortgages and energy efficiency, the relationship between mortgage performance and energy efficiency. And by the way, we do have a study in the works on the relationship between residential mortgage performance and energy efficiency. A challenge in studying commercial performance for commercial loans like these is that the loan pools are just a lot smaller. And so it gets a lot tougher to get results for a large number of loans. And again, the programs we reviewed were almost entirely residential loans, and where there were commercial loans, we removed those. I think you asked one other question, Sean, that I can't, the third question that I have forgotten.
That's all right, Jeff. I think we've covered it.
I don't know if others have anything to weigh in on here.
Yeah, and I am going to transition to our wrap-up slides if others have kind of final comments or thoughts before we transition to that.
One thing that I was remiss in saying was to thank Mary and Michigan Saves, Todd Parker there, the whole team there. They were just amazingly helpful and put a lot of work into it themselves. Thanks a lot, Mary.
And the same to all three of the other programs who did have to go to some effort to get us the data for this study. So I do want to note that there were a few questions that I saw in Slido about on-bill loans, and that all those questions will be addressed in the written report. We did observe some interesting and perhaps surprising results there. And I don't know, Sean, if we're able to answer Slido questions after the fact. But if so, maybe we can throw a few replies. And again, the main event will be when the actual report is released. We will be speaking to those things.
Fantastic. Well, let's transition to our wrap-up slides here. Leave folks with some resources to know where they can find more. Let's go ahead and highlight that I invite everyone to check out DOE's excellent energy efficiency financing resources. Highlights include the Better Buildings Financing Navigator, the C-Action Network Financing Resources, and financing resources housed on DOE's State and Local Solutions Center. Whether you're a building owner looking for guidance on the most suitable financing for a project, or a public sector energy professional looking to design a financing program, we've got something for everyone. You can explore these resources, which are linked in the handout shared in the Zoom chat. Next slide, please. This webinar is part of the 2021-2022 Better Buildings webinar series. As you can see, we have a great lineup of presentations through April. Visit the Better Buildings Solutions Center to learn more and register for these upcoming webinars. Next slide, please. We hope you will join us on December 7th for our next webinar titled Assessing and Reducing Embodied Carbon, Join this webinar to move from theoretical assessment and reduction to practice as panelists share real-world examples, tackling embodied carbon, exploring life cycle assessments, and building design and renovation to reduce CO2 emissions. Next slide. If you're interested in learning more about the topics discussed today, I encourage you to download our additional resources handout in the Zoom chat box. The handout contains links to resources from the Better Buildings and our speakers. And our final slide, we have some contact information, and I definitely want to thank our panelists, presenters, all of those who've advised and helped review the forthcoming C-Action Loan Performance Study. It's been tremendously helpful. We're very excited to be approaching the release of this study within probably the next few months. I encourage you all to follow the Better Buildings Initiative on LinkedIn and Twitter for the latest news, as well as stay up to speed with the State and Local Solutions Center, as well as LBNL for the release of this study. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. Thank you to our speakers for bringing your expertise and energy. And I hope everyone has a great afternoon.